Alright, hello everybody, this is Antonio Wolf here with Hyperion, Joshua, and Chaya, continuing on the Science of Logic, Chapter 3. Last time we went through the one in the void, and we left off with Repulsion and Attraction. So let's see how this goes. And is my volume loud enough? Is it alright?
Sounds good, yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
Alright, exclusion of the one. The many ones are each a being. Their existence or their reference to the one another is a non-reference. It is external to them. The abstract void. But they themselves are now this negative reference to themselves as to existent others. The demonstrated contradiction, the infinity posited in the immediacy of being. With this, repulsion now finds immediately before it that which is repelled by it. In this determination, it is an excluding. The one repels from itself only the many not generated by it. The ones not posited by it. This repelling is mutual or from all sides, relative, limited by the being of the ones. Alright, so do you remember the whole thing on like the one in the void, Hyperion? It's been a couple of weeks, so it's not fresh in my mind.
Yeah, only like vaguely.
Should we go back then?
Let's see, let's go up to C many
I think
ones.
if I...
So
Okay.
135. Repulsion. The one and the void constitute the first existence of being for itself. Each of these moments has negation for its determination, and is posited at the same time as an existence. In accordance with this determination, the one and the void are each the reference of negation to negation, as of an other to its other. The one is negation in the determination of being, the void negation in the determination of non-being. Essentially, however, the one is only self-reference as referring negation. That is, it is itself the same as the void outside it is supposed to be. Both are, however, also posited as each an affirmative existence, the one as being for itself as such, the other as indeterminate existence in general. And each is referring to the other as to an other existence. And if we remember, being for itself originally is, just taken as absolute, also an indeterminate existence in general. Essentially, however, the being for itself of the one is the ideality of the existence and of the other. It does not refer to an other, but only to itself. But inasmuch as the being for itself is fixed as the one, as existent for itself, as immediately present, its negative reference to itself is at the same time reference to an existent. And since the reference is just as much negative, that to which the being for itself refers remains determined as an existence and as an other. As essentially self-reference, the other is not indeterminate negation like the void, but is likewise a one. The one is consequently a becoming of many ones. So, remember the whole big deal I make about this whole, the doubling reflection and the self-reference being literally a self-reference of a side-by-sidedness of the same. Being for itself is only for itself insofar as it literally is reflected against itself. But if it is reflected against itself, then the one and the void are the same. They are both being for itself, and then you have the many ones. Okay, so...
Yeah.
And that catches us up. Makes sense. Is it clear for you?
Uh-huh.
Yep.
Alright, let's go back. Repulsion, attraction. Exclusion of the one. The many ones are each a being. Their existence of the reference to one another is a non-reference. It is external to them. The abstract void. But they themselves are now this negative reference to themselves as to existent others, the demonstrated contradiction, the infinity posited in the immediacy of being. With this, repulsion now finds immediately before it that which is repelled by it. So each one says, oh, I am for myself, it is being for itself. But in being for itself, it has to refer to itself, and therefore double itself, and therefore the one is always many. So it's not like that the one in the void have been like immediately equated, but rather just like the one necessarily has to be a determinate one, and to be a determinate one, it necessarily has to be many, and so the other necessarily has to be itself. Yada yada. Okay, with this, repulsion now finds immediately before it that which is repelled by it. In this determination, it is an excluding. The one repels from itself only the many not generated by it, to the ones not posited by it. This repelling is mutual or from all sides, relative, limited by the being of the ones. Plurality is not at first posited otherness. Limit is only the void, only that in which the ones are not. In the limit, these also are. They are in the void, or the repulsion is in their common connecting reference. So this is reminding me of negative unity, in which, it's like the other. The other is through negating the other, but it tries to be only this negative reference. It doesn't try to make it positive or constitutive. This mutual repulsion is the posited existence of the many ones. It is not their being for itself, in accordance with which they would be distinguished as many only in a third, but is rather their own distinguishing which preserves them. They mutually negate themselves, posit one another as being only for one, but at the same time they negate this by being only for one just as much. They repel their ideality. They repel the ideality they have and are. So the moments which in ideality are absolutely united come apart. In its being for itself, the one is also for one. But this for one which it is, for which it is itself. Its distinguishing from itself is immediately sublated. But in the plurality, distinguished is. Sorry for that. My tongue is running over itself a lot today. Data. Let me read that. So the moments which in ideality are absolutely united come apart. In its being for itself, the one is also for one. But this one for which it is itself. Its distinguishing from itself is immediately sublated. But in the plurality, the distinguished one has a being. The being for one has been determined in exclusion, is therefore a being for other. Each thus comes to be repelled by an other, is sublated and made into a one, which is not for itself, but for one, and an other one at that. So, So, alright, is that movement so far clear in like the way that the being for one is like self-subverting?
I think so, but I
sorta
need to go through it. Yeah. Okay, so they mutually negate themselves and posit one another as posit each other, like the one posits the
being
other
for
as
one,
being for one. Okay, and then that negates the being
for itself.
That has to that has to negate that, and then they repel the ideality that they have, which the ideality
is being the moment. So so when they posit, when they repel the other, they posit themselves as being for one, so being for the other.
Yeah.
But in being for itself, they immediately like negate that and bring it back, and negate that they are the ideal. Bring back the infinity.
And then they are.
Well, no, that they are the ideality, but they repel the ideality they have and are.
Yeah. Oh, I thought like it has it repels the ideality that they have, and then they are, but I guess not. It repels the ideality that they have and
Yeah.
that they are, right? Okay, now it makes sense then.
So the moments which an ideality are absolutely united come apart, that be the being for one and being for, what was it? I forget. Being for self and being for
What?
one.
Being for one and being for
Yeah,
itself.
those are the moments of ideality, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the moments which an ideality are absolutely united come apart. In its being for itself, the one is also for one.
Yeah, because itself is the one, so it's being for one as well as being for itself.
But this one for which it is itself. Its distinguishing from itself is immediately sublated. But in the plurality, the distinguished one has a being. The being for one has been determined in exclusion.
As has been
As
determined.
has been determined in exclusion is therefore a being for other.
Yeah.
Yeah, because, in being for one, it idealizes the one which is being for one and makes it being for other.
Yeah.
Each thus comes to be repelled by an other, is sublated and made into a one, which is not for itself, but for one, and an other one at that. So, it's just a cycle of, it's the one, it's the many, it's the one, it's the many.
Constant self-othering.
Yeah, it's the one, it's the many, it's the one, it's the many, it's the one, it's the many. And you can't stop. The being for itself of the many ones thus shows itself to be their self-preservation through the mediation of their mutual repulsion, in which they sublated themselves reciprocally and posit the others as mere being for another. But the self-preservation consists at the same time in repelling this ideality and positing the ones as not being for another. This self-preservation of the ones through their negative reference to one another is, however, rather their dissolution. The ones only are... The ones not only are, but maintain themselves through their reciprocal exclusion. First, it is in their being, and indeed their being in itself, as contrasted with the reference to the other, that they should now have a firm point of support for their diversity as against their being negated. This in itselfness rests on their being ones. They all are this, in their being in itself, instead of having their firm point of support for their diversity, they are all the same. Second, their existence and their way of relating to one another, that is, their positing themselves as one, is their reciprocal negating. This, however, is likewise one and the same determination of all, through which they therefore posit themselves as identical, just as, by being in themselves the same, the ideality that should be posited in them through others is their own, and they just repel just as little. According to their being and positing, they are consequently only one affirmative unity.
So they cancel each other out, or?
Yeah, that seems to be
not totally,
it.
right?
It's okay, rereading. The ones not only are, but maintain themselves through their reciprocal exclusion. So, they mutually negate. Each one says, I am for myself, a being for itself. First, it is their being, and indeed their being in itself, as contrasted with their reference to the other, that they should now have a firm point of support for their diversity as against their being negated. So, in having being in itself, they can be for themselves without having reference to an external other. This in itselfness rests on their being ones, but they all are this, in their being in itself. Instead of having their firm point of support for their diversity, they are all the same. So, they are what Hegel calls undistinguished.
Yeah.
So there's no determinate. There's no determinacy that actually relates them and therefore keeps them apart. It's
there's no determinate difference.
Think about things have space. Things that are spatial, yet are zero-dimensional. And the space itself is not defined as anything other than space itself.
Yeah.
There's actually nothing which keeps the points from just being completely stacked on top of each other and just being one single point. So there's nothing that holds them apart in simply being for themselves, in themselves. Second, their existence and their way of relating to one another, that is, their positing themselves as one, is the reciprocal negating. This, however, is likewise one and the same determination of all, through which they therefore posit themselves as identical. Just as by being in themselves the same, the ideality that should be posited in them through others is their own, and they thus repel just as little. So, they repel the other ones as not, being themselves, but in repelling them, that is in having that repulsion, that is the reality of their being for themselves, by being for one, in order to be for itself. But once the repulsion is made, in order to negate the fact that the others have anything to do with it, but it has to do it, because if it didn't, it couldn't even be for itself, because it needs the being for one moment. But you can't have the being for one moment if there isn't other ones for which are for one. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Is like what second, their existence and their way of relating to one another, that is, their positing themselves as one, is their reciprocal negating. This, however, is likewise one and the same determination of all, through which they therefore posit themselves as identical. Just as, by being in themselves the same, the ideality that should be posited in them through others is their own, and they thus repel just as little. So, the other which is repelled is brought back in immediately. It has to. According to their being and positing, they are consequently only one affirmative unity. So the being for ones are being for ones in the one, which is just the ones. The ones are the one.
Yeah. Because as soon as you separate them, they just revert back to being the one, so it's an affirmative unity, right?
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, the way I originally thought this before I read this, just by the term of the names, I thought that like the one and the void would literally work this way, in which the one would literally be the many within the one, which is truly the void, because the many are within the void and separated by the void. But that's not what Hegel has said yet. This consideration regarding the ones, that from either side of their determination, whether they just are or refer to one another, they show themselves to be only one and the same, indistinguishable, is a comparison that belongs to us. Also to be seen, therefore, is what is posited in them in their mutual reference itself. They are, this much is presupposed in this reference, and they are only inasmuch as they negate themselves reciprocally and at the same time keep away this ideality, their being negated from themselves, that is, they negate the reciprocal negating. But they are only inasmuch as they negate, and so, since the reciprocal negating is negated, their being is negated. To be sure, since they are, nothing would be negated through this negating, which for them is only something external. This negating of the other rebounds off them, coming their way only by striking their surface. And yet they turn back upon themselves only by negating the others. They are only as this mediation, this turning back of theirs, is their self-preservation and their being for itself. Since their negating is ineffectual because of the resistance offered by the others, whether as existence or as negating, they do not return back to themselves, do not preserve themselves, and so are not.
Okay.
So the one can only exist as the many, but the moment the many are there, they immediately revert back to the indeterminate one.
Yeah.
Well, not the indeterminate one, but just like they immediately revert back to like this self-sublating unity, which is that immediacy of being. At least on that level, the being for itself. But then that immediately just recurs the whole process. And so the thing he said that earlier, that the first sentence, this consideration regarding the ones that from either side of their determination, whether they just are or refer to another, they show themselves to be only one and the same, indistinguishable, is a comparison that belongs to us. That's always important to keep in mind. So, that little paragraph before that, talking about how, they are indifferent or undistinguished, that's a judgment we make if we just look at how each of them is, how each moment is structured, and we compare them and we say, oh, well, it's like being a nothing. They're both indeterminate, they have no content, they have no form, and therefore they are the same. You can say that, but not imminently. It's not what the logic itself imminently has to show. That was the case of the paragraphs before that about the movement of exclusion, which shows us the imminently why this is so. So remark. Driven to the extreme of the one as being for itself, self-subsistence is an abstract, formal self-subsistence that destroys itself. It is the ultimate, most stubborn error, one which takes itself as the ultimate truth, whether it assumes the more concrete form of abstract freedom, of pure I, and further still, of evil. It is the freedom which so misconceived itself as to place its essence in this abstraction, and in thus shutting itself up within itself, flatters itself that it attains itself in all purity. This self-subsistence, to determine it further, is the error of considering its own essence negatively and of relating itself to it negatively. It is thus a negative relating to itself which, while wanting to gain its own being, destroys it. And this, his doing, is only the manifestation of the nullity of the doing. Reconciliation is the recognition that towards which the negative relating is directed is rather its essence, and this is only in the desisting from the negativity of its being for itself, rather than in holding fast to it.
Did you skip something?
Not that I noticed.
Oh, okay. Maybe I'm wrong.
Oh, I might have skipped a couple paragraphs.
Yeah.
Sorry about
That's
that.
what I thought.
Previous page.
We go back to the previous page, section 21.163.
Yeah, we missed a term. We learned a new term.
It was previously remarked that the ones themselves are each a one like any other. This is not just a matter of our connecting them by way of reference, of bringing them together externally. Repulsion is itself a referring. The one that excludes the ones refers itself to them, to the ones, that is, to itself. The negative relating of the ones to one another is consequently only a coming together with oneself. This identity in which the repelling crosses over is the sublation of their diversity and externality, which they should have rather asserted with respect to each other by excluding each other. This self-positing in a one of the many ones is attraction. Okay. Something to always keep in mind as well, why is it that the one referring to the other ones is referring to itself? You always have to...
Because it's made up of them.
Not just because of that. It's because there's multiple reasons. One, it's made up of them, and they are its moments, so they are itself. It's like how your hand is yourself, in a way.
It's their absolute unity. Yeah.
But at the same time, I think the more abstract and technical sense is literally the fact that it's the category referring to the category. The one is referring to the one. Regardless of what the plurality is, it's still the one referring to the one. So that's the self-reference right there. That's the unity with itself, the self-othering of itself. So the one refers to the one as if it is an other.
Yeah, from outside. But since it's ultimately from its own perspective, there's that negation.
Exactly. Every concept that we go through is always taken as the absolute step. It's the next step of the absolute. So everything is in reference to itself, which is why Hegel does a lot of this whole self-reference of negating, and othering, and all these other things, because that's just how it works. the negative relating of the ones to one another is consequently only a coming together with oneself. So even here, you start getting literally the foundations of Hegel's ethics of recognition very clearly. So should I reread that first paragraph of the remark or not?
Yeah, because I wasn't reading it at the time. I was trying to figure out what you were reading.
Remark: driven to the extreme of the one as being for itself, self-subsistence is an abstract, formal self-subsistence that destroys itself. It is the ultimate, most stubborn error, one which takes itself as the ultimate truth, whether it assumes the more concrete form of abstract freedom, of pure I, and further still, of evil. Abstract freedom, we know a couple of lads or two, or many, rather, who have a conception of abstract freedom and the pure I.
The pure I. Yeah.
And they're Marxists.
And of evil.
Oh yeah.
And of finitude.
Oh yeah, I mean, like, right, the next thing he says, it is the freedom which so misconceives itself as to place its essence in this abstraction, and in thus shutting itself up within itself, flatters itself that it attains itself in all purity. This self-subsistence, to determine it further, is the error of considering its own essence negatively and of relating itself to it negatively. And so this is evil in that it is literally self-centered. Purely self-centered, it takes the one.
Takes itself as absolute in its own finitude. And it's still, it's like a lot of, I don't want to get off on a tear, but it's like a lot of people like assuming that what their position is perfect and nothing needs to be changed about it. Because you're like shutting everything off, any critique. Even self-critique, especially self-critique.
Yep. So it is thus a negative relating to itself, which, while wanting to gain its own being, destroys it, and this, his doing, is only the manifestation of the nullity of the doing. Reconciliation is the recognition that that towards which the negative relating is directed is rather its essence, and this is only in the desisting from the negativity of its being for itself, rather than holding fast to it. So, the evil person destroys the other person, believing that they are free from like any negative effects from it.
Outside influence.
Because the other is not oneself, therefore it does not destroy oneself. And Hegel says, you may think that way, and you might even feel fine, but the truth of the matter is, like, you have in fact destroyed your own essence. And there's various reasons for why that is just true. For example, in the early essays,
because we.
Yeah,
sorry.
In the early essays of The Spirit of Christianity and Its Fate, he gives the example of something he calls the Avenging Fates, in which, like, when you do things that are evil in that way, like evil towards the other, in which you negate the others, you literally call down the immediacy of what he calls the Fates, and the Fates being this logical relationship in which you have destroyed your own essence, and therefore, even if you don't feel like an asshole, and even if you don't feel like any remorse for what you do, the rest of society will destroy you. You can't just go around being self-centered all the time. It's gonna kick you in the ass eventually. That's just kind of the law of society. And there's also if you're a regular functioning, like, well-adjusted human being who is developed properly, you will feel that very destruction in yourself. It's why people go to war and they come back with PTSD. It literally destroys. It's a harm to your soul in many ways.
Yeah.
So continue.
Plus, it's a delusion, I think. Like, the individual's never alone, really. You can convince yourself of that, but you have to try to convince yourself it's not true.
Yeah.
That's why narcissism is like self-love is no form of love, because it's a failure of being broken into by another, and thus a failure of being yourself.
Well, narcissists are typically very broken people. They're people
Yeah.
who are very immature, like they're people who really can't be adult, and they bring others down with them.
Yeah, literally, they cannot recognize.
Yeah. And thus are not recognized, I guess.
All right.
Well, there's also
Yeah, go ahead.
there's also an element there where they kind of universalize their own brokenness, and they just assume that everyone is as broken and screwed up as they are. So there's that element to it as well. But we're getting like way off track here.
We're getting Lacanian all up in here. All right, let's get back to Hegel. It is an ancient proposition that the one is many, and especially that the many is one. It should again be observed in this connection that, as expressed in propositions, the truth of the one and the many appears in an inadequate form. Such a truth is to be grasped and expressed only as a becoming, as a process of repulsion and attraction, not as being, in the way the latter is posited in a proposition as inert unity. Earlier mention was made recalling Plato's dialectic in the Parmenides on the derivation of the many from the one, specifically from the proposition, the one is. It is the internal dialectic of the concept that has been expounded. It is easiest to grasp the dialectic of the proposition, that the many is one as external reflection, and inasmuch as the subject matter also, the many is a mutual externality. Reflection may indeed be external here. This comparison of the many with one another immediately shows that each is absolutely determined just as any other. Each is a one, each a one of many. Each is by suiting the others, so that they are absolutely the same. Absolutely one determination is present. This is a matter of fact, and all that needs to be done is simply to grasp the fact. If in its stubbornness the understanding refuses to do it, it is only because it also has distinction in mind, and rightly so. But distinction is not left out because of that fact. As surely as the fact is no less there despite distinction, one could, as it were, reassure the understanding concerning this simple grasp of the fact of unity, that distinction will also come in again. And here we're starting to get the real concreteness of the beginnings of the first shadow of the concept. It's a process. The unity of the one is a process. The universal is not this abstract, static thing. The universal itself is this process of the many, and of the production of the many and the returning of them to the one in their unity. So, when he says that you really can't say this in a proposition, it's absolutely true. You have to show it, you have to experience that concept in order to really get it. If you just say it, you may say something true, but it doesn't quite make sense.
Am I right to think this is sort of like infinity?
Yeah, it's a higher version of infinity. Or rather, it is a more determinate version of infinity. I don't know, version would be a wrong thing to say. It's a more determinate infinity. That's it. All right, continuing. B, the one of attraction. Or at least I think so. There seems to be a typo here. The one of attraction. Or maybe it isn't. Who knows? Repulsion is the fragmentation of the one, first into the many of which it is negative relating, since they presuppose each other as each existent. It is only the ought of ideality, This ideality will, however, be realized in attraction. Repulsion passes over into attraction, the many ones into one. The many ones into one. Okay, so it wasn't a typo. I actually like it when like these like double side by side words happen. I find that so interesting.
The one.
The one, the is, that. Every time it happens, like when I'm writing, I'm like, maybe there's something speculative to that, and usually there is, I think. Both repulsion and attraction are at first distinguished from each other, repulsion as the reality of the ones, attraction as their posited ideality. Attraction refers to repulsion by having it for a presupposition. Repulsion delivers the material for attraction. If there were no ones, there would be nothing to attract. The representation of continuing attraction, of the consumption of the ones, presupposes an equally continuing generation of the ones. The sense representation of spatial attraction gives continuity to the flow of ones to be attracted. To replace the atoms that vanish at the point of attraction, another multitude comes forth from the void infinitely if one so wishes. If attraction were represented as accomplished, that is, the many as brought to the point of the one, the result would be just an inert one, no longer any attraction. The ideality immediately present in attraction still also has in it the determination of the negation of itself. The many ones to which it refers, attraction is inseparable from repulsion. Sounds like gravity. Metaphysical gravity.
Yeah, I mean that's attraction and repulsion. That's what I always think of. That are magnets.
Fucking magnets, how do they work?
Like this.
Hegelian
Tell
magnets.
Tell the insane clown posse to read Hegel.
Oh, what was the name of the guy that made like the God's magnet?
Walter Russell.
I have no idea.
Schelling apparently came up with the exact same idea. Coincidence? Probably. Well, probably not. I mean, like when you're tripping out and like getting messages from the beyond of the Akashic record, it's not surprising that many people get the same thing.
Mm-hmm. We always get what we need.
Except for Schelling, he never got those bombs. They just never arrived.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, continuing to attract.
Okay, so what's it saying here?
What's it saying?
What? Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure I understand, but
they do both repulsion and attraction are at first distinguished from each other. Repulsion is the reality of the ones, so it's the othering. Attraction is their positive ideality. Attraction refers to repulsion by having it for a presupposition. Repulsion delivers the material for attraction, so it creates so many ones. If there were no ones, there would be nothing to attract. The representation of continuing attraction, or the consumption of the ones, presupposes an equally continuing generation of the ones. The sense representation of spatial attraction gives continuity to the flow of the ones to be attracted. To replace the atoms, blah, blah, blah. If attraction were represented as accomplished, that is, the many is brought to the point of the one, the result would be just an inert one, no longer any attraction. The ideality immediately present in attraction still has in it the determination of the negation of itself. The many ones to which it refers, attraction is inseparable from repulsion. So, yeah, attraction is just literally the opposite process of repulsion. Repulsion, individuates the ones, takes the one to the many ones, and then attraction brings the many ones back to the one, and like this is complete. This is not a being, a static being. It's a dynamic being. It's a becoming. It's a process. Therefore, because if it wasn't, then it wouldn't. It would be literally unintelligible. It would be a brute contradiction, and we don't want that. Despite what some people say about a Hegelian contradiction. Some people here being, oh god, I can't remember his name.
Huh?
The Australian guy, logic dude, Buddhism, Dialytheism.
Dialtheism? Who?
That's exactly. I'm can't remember his name. Grand Priest. That's who. He claims Hegel. He claims
Oh,
Hegel
yeah,
as part of his lineage of like nonsense logic, and I don't think so. Admittedly, I haven't read any of his
Yeah.
work, but frankly, I'm just
No.
not interested. But from what I have gleaned from what other people say, it seems to me he doesn't get it. To attract pertains at first in equal measure to each of the many ones as immediately present. None has advantage over another. What would result then is an equilibrium in the attraction, or more precisely an equilibrium in the attraction and the repulsion themselves, and an inert state of rest without any ideality present there. But there can be no question here of any such immediately present one taking precedence over another, for this would presuppose a determinate distinction between them. Attraction is rather the positing of the given lack of distinction among the ones. Attraction is itself the positing in the first place of a one distinct from other ones. These are only the immediate ones that are to preserve themselves through repulsion, through their positive negation. However, what precedes is the one of attraction, which is therefore determined as the mediated one, the one posited as one. The first ones, as immediate, do not in their ideality return into themselves, but have this ideality each in another. So, the first ones just aren't capable of being for themselves, because, they dissolve. They repulse, but then is dissolved back. The one is, however, ideality that has been realized, posited in the one. It attracts through the mediation of repulsion. It contains in itself this mediation as its determination. It thus does not swallow the attracted ones within it as into one point, that is, does not sublate them abstractly. Since it contains repulsion in its determination, the latter equally preserves the ones as many within it. By its attracting, it musters, so to speak, something before it, gains an area or a filling. Thus there is in it the unity of repulsion and attraction in general. So, alright, that section more or less clear. Seems pretty clear to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The connection of repulsion and attraction. The difference of the one and the many has determined itself as a difference of the mutual reference connecting them, which breaks down into two, repulsion and attraction, each of which stands at first outside the other on its own, in such a way that the two are essentially joined together nevertheless. Their still indeterminate unity must be brought out in greater detail. As the fundamental determination of the one, repulsion appears first, and it appears as immediate, like its ones which are indeed generated by it, and yet are at the same time posited as immediate, and it is therefore indifferent to the attraction which is added to it externally as thus presupposed. These darn dogs. Rather, attraction is not presupposed by repulsion. It is not supposed to have any part in the positing and in the being of the latter. That is, as if repulsion were not already in it, the negation of itself, or the ones were not already negated in it. In this way, we have repulsion in abstraction, by itself, and attraction likewise holds out to the ones, as each an existent, the side of an immediate existence which comes to them by itself as an other. Alright, I just read that, and my mind is like, what? maybe it's because of dogs, and like, I'm hungry. Alright, let me read that. As the fundamental determination of the one, repulsion appears first, and appears as immediate, like its ones which are indeed generated by it, and yet are at the same time posited as immediate, and it is therefore indifferent to the attraction which is added to it externally as thus presupposed. Okay. So the moments appear separate and are not themselves internally linked. They are immediately opposed.
Yeah.
But it's not like that we have.
But they have equal status or whatever.
Rather, attraction is not presupposed for repulsion, so there's no imminent link yet. It is not supposed to have any part in the positing and in the being of the latter. That is, as if repulsion were not already in its negation of itself, or the ones were not already negated in it. In this way, we have repulsion in abstraction by itself, and attraction likewise holds out to the ones as each an existent, the side of an immediate existence which comes to them by itself as an other. If we take mere repulsion in this way for itself, it is then the dispersion of the many ones in indeterminacy outside the sphere of repulsion itself. For repulsion is the negating of the connection of the many to one another. Sorry. So let me start over again. If we take mere repulsion in this way for itself, it is then the dispersion of the many ones in indeterminacy outside the sphere of repulsion itself. For repulsion is the negating of the connection of the many to one another. Lack of connection is their determination when abstractly taken. But repulsion is not just the void. The ones, the one connected, do not repel what constitutes their determination, do not exclude it. Although negative, repulsion is nonetheless essentially connection. The mutual repulsion in flight is not a liberation from what is repelled and fled from. That which is excluded still stands in connection with what is excluded from it. But this moment of connection is attraction, which is thus within repulsion itself. It is a negating of that abstract repulsion by which the ones would each be an existence referring only to itself without mutual exclusion. Alright, so does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Sort of.
I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, that, in repulsion, if repulsion is this breaking negation of saying, I have no relation to the other, I am for myself, being for itself. The fact that it has to make the distinction at all already is the imminent link, and therefore immediately subverts itself and is exactly attraction. Because
it's a repulsion of repulsion.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. I love that. So, repulsion and being repulsion.
I love it when...
Yeah, go ahead.
I love it when Hegel does stuff like that.
So, in saying, I am not that, and you say, I am absolutely not that, you have nonetheless absolutely connected yourself to it. Can't have it any other way. A negation is itself a positive affirmation. So, is that clear?
Uh-huh.
Yep, crystal.
Yep.
But in starting with the repulsion of the ones as immediately present there, and with attraction consequently also posited as intruding on them externally, the two, repulsion and attraction, are held apart as diverse determinations despite their inseparability. But it has been established that it is not just repulsion which is presupposed by attraction, but that there equally is present also a reverse connection of repulsion to attraction, and that repulsion no less has attraction for its presupposition. As thus determined, they are inseparable, and at the same time each is determined as an ought and a limitation which is with respect to the other. Their ought is their abstract determinateness as each an existent in itself, a determinateness, however, which is thereby directed beyond itself and refers to the other. And so, through the mediation of the other, each is as other, their self-subsistence consists in their being mutually posited in this mediation as an other determining. Thus repulsion is the positing of the many, attraction the positing of the one. This latter is equally the negation of the many, and the former the negation of the ideality of such a many in the one. So that attraction too is attraction only through the mediation of repulsion, just as repulsion is repulsion through the mediation of attraction. In all this, however, the mediation of each with itself through the other is in fact negated. Each of the two determinations is its own self-mediation. This will result from a closer examination of the two determinations and will bring us back to the unity of their concept. So, when he says that they are in fact, the two determinations is its own self-mediation, that's exactly the thing, the other of the other, attraction of attraction, repulsion of repulsion, in facing the other, they only face themselves. They only face their own ideality, their own imminent moments, And it's like the dynamo that just flips on itself incessantly. In the first place, that each presupposes itself, that in its presupposition each refers only to itself. This is already present in the way the still relative repulsion and attraction behave at first. Relative repulsion is the mutual repulsion of many ones which are already at hand, supposedly immediately given, but that there be many ones. This is repulsion itself. Any presupposition that it would have is only its own positing. Moreover, the determination of the being that would accrue to the ones apart from their being posited, whereby they would already be, belongs likewise to repulsion. Repelling is that through which the ones manifest themselves and maintain themselves as ones, through which they are as such. Their being is the repulsion itself, which is thus not some relative existence against another other, but relates itself throughout only to itself. Attraction is the positing of the one as such, of the real one, with respect to which the existence of the many is determined as only a vanishing idealization. Attraction thus directly presupposes itself. It presupposes itself in the determination, namely, of the many ones to be an idealization, the same ones which are otherwise supposed to have existence for themselves and to repel others, including therefore any other that attracts. Against this determination of repulsion, the ones do not attain ideality only through the relation to attraction. On the contrary, the ideality is presupposed. It is the ideality of the ones as existent in itself, inasmuch as they, as ones, including the one conceived as attracting, are not distinguished from the one another, but are one and the same. This self-presupposing of the two determinations, each for itself, implies further that each contains within itself the other as moment. Self-presupposing, in general, is the positing of oneself in a one as the negative of oneself, repulsion, and what is presupposed in this positing is the same as that which presupposes attraction. That each is in itself only a moment, this is the transition of each from itself into the other, the negation of itself in the other, and the positing of itself as the other of itself. The one, as such, is thus a coming out of itself, is itself only the positing of itself as its other as the many, and the many, for its part, is only the falling back upon itself and the positing of itself as its other, as a one, and is in this equally only the connecting of itself to itself, each continuing itself in its other. Therefore, the coming out of itself, repulsion, and the self-positing as one, attraction, are already inherently present as undivided, but in the repulsion and attraction which are relative, that is, which presuppose immediate determinately existent ones. And I think determinedly, as opposed to determinately, is, at least in the philosophy of nature, the translator notes that it's determination with quality. So it's a qualitative determinant. But not sure, don't take me on that. But that's what was noted in another work, by another translator, of course. Determinedly existent ones. It is posited that the two are each within it this negation of itself, and consequently also the continuity of itself in its other. The repulsion of the determinately existent ones is the self-preservation of the one through the mutual holding off of the others, so that one, the other ones are negated in it. This is the side of its existence or of its being for another, and is therefore attraction as the ideality of the ones. And two, the one is in itself without reference to the others. However, not only has the in itself in general long since passed over into being for itself, the one in itself, according to its determination, is the coming to be of many. The attraction of the existent ones is their ideality and the positing of the one, and in this, as both negating and the producing of the one, attraction sublates itself, and as positing within it of the one is the negative of itself. It is repulsion. So, right, that more or less clear? Seems like such just a summary of a section.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So this is a summary paragraph on the whole argument.
Is this the remark? We're in the remark, aren't we?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Borrowing.
so.
Yeah. Okay. Then yeah.
Well, there's another remark right after this remark.
No, this isn't.
Yeah, I don't think this is a remark.
Yeah, I thought this was C.
Oh. With this, the development of being for itself is completed and has attained its result in connecting itself to itself infinitely, that is, as the positive negation of negation. The one is the mediation by which it repels itself as its absolute, that is, abstract, otherness. Okay, let me read that. In connecting itself to itself infinitely, that is, as the positive negation of negation, the one is the mediation by which it repels itself as its absolute, that is, abstract, otherness, the many, from itself, and is thus negatively connecting itself to this, its non-being. It sublates it and is in it precisely only the connection to itself. The one is only this becoming in which the determination it begins, that is, its being posited as an immediate existent, and equally that as a result it has restored itself as the one, that is, the equally immediate and exclusive one, have vanished. The process which it is posits and contains it from all sides only as something sublated. The sublation determined at first only as a relative sublating of the connection to another existent, a connection which is therefore itself not an indifferent repulsion and attraction, equally proves itself to pass over into the infinite connection and mediation through the negation of the external connection of immediate and determinate existence, and to have for result precisely that becoming which, in the instability of its moments, is the collapse, or rather the going together with itself into simple immediacy. This being, according to the determination which it has now acquired, is quantity. And we arrive at the nightmare of pretty much 99% of people in real life and in philosophical life. Because most people who read the logic will skip the logic of quantity and measure like a plague.
Why?
Because it's math.
Math.
Oh.
Yeah.
But it's important because it's probably because at least from what Winfield notes about it, not many other people actually read it or comment on it. But the ones who do have noted that there is just deep connection between the logic of quantity and the logic of capital. As a matter of fact, the logic of capital is a logic of quantity, which is precisely it explains a lot of its fundamental elements, such as its indifferent difference and all these things, which are the hallmarks of the logics of quantity. If we briefly review the moments of this transition of quality into quantity, we find that the qualitative has being and immediacy for its fundamental determination, and the limit of the determinateness are in this immediacy so identical with the being of something that the something itself vanishes along with its alteration. As thus posited, it is determined as finite. Because of the immediacy of this unity in which the distinction has disappeared, although it is implicitly present in the unity of being and nothing, the distinction falls outside that unity as otherness in general. This reference to the other contradicts the immediacy in which the qualitative determinateness is self-reference. This otherness is sublated in the infinity of the being for itself that has realized the distinction implicitly present in it in the negation of negation, has realized it as the one and the many and as their connecting references, and has also elevated the qualitative to true unity, that is, a unity which is no longer immediate but posited as accordant with itself. This unity is therefore, what is that? Is that alpha? I don't know. Okay,
Yep.
alpha being
Okay.
only as affirmative, that is immediacy, self-mediated through the negation of negation. Being is posited as a unity, permeating its determinacies, limits, etc., which are posited in it as sublated. And I don't know what the B is. Oh, beta?
Beta?
Okay.
Beta.
Existence in this determination, it is a negation. It is negation or determinateness as moment of the affirmative being. Yet this determinateness is no longer immediate but reflected into itself, refers not to another but to itself. Absolutely determined being, absolute in itselfness, the one otherness as such is itself being for itself. Is that gamma?
Yep.
Upsilon.
Gamma.
No, I'm just kidding. It's gamma.
It's gamma.
Being
It's
for
gamma.
itself, as that being which persists across the determinateness, and in which the one and even the being determined in itself are posited as sublated. The one is simultaneously determined as having gone beyond itself and as unity. The one, the absolutely determined limit, is consequently posited as a limit which is none, a limit which is in being but is indifferent to it. All right. So, any thoughts on the quality as a whole? Being, nothing becoming, existence determinacy, something, finite, infinite, being for itself.
Yeah. Being for one.
Yep.
One of the many. Now we're at quantity. Oh, sorry, I skipped repulsion attraction. Now we're at quantity.
So, I think my intuition here was right in that you definitely need all three first chapters
You mean
to get at least the absolute basics for really grasping like almost everything else that goes on in anything else with Hegel.
Yeah.
And this gives you like a really good basis, a really good basis to just go and like read anything else you want, because these moments basically already like have the proper shape of what the ultimate process of Hegel is, which is the concept. You know, it's not fully articulated yet as that, but you have basically all the movements and the types of movements which will just consistently recur. There is something that is definitely different that comes up in essence, which is explicit positing. Because here we have positing, but it's not explicit positing yet. Explicit positing is something that only happens in the logic of essence, and then again, you know, taken up in the concept. But other than that, like, yeah, you can read, you can open up the phenomenology spirit, and you'll see everything. Absolutely, all these moves will be there. So, all right, care to do us the honors of finishing the last remark, Hyperion?
Yeah, sure. Attraction, repulsion, as is well known, are usually regarded as forces. We must now compare this determination of them, and the relations connected with it, with the way we have just conceived them. Regarded as forces, they are treated as self-standing, and therefore not as referring to each other by nature, that is, not as each only a moment that should pass over into its opposite, but as each persisting, instead, in opposition to the other. They are represented, moreover, as joining in a third, in matter, in such a way, however, that this unification does not count as their truth, but each counts rather as a first, and as an existent in and for itself. It is matter, or the determinations of matter, which are rather posited and produced through them. When it is said that matter has these two forces in itself, this unity which they have in matter is understood as an association within which they are at the same time presupposed to remain independent existents, free of each other. Kant famously constructed matter from the forces of repulsion and attraction, or at least, as he put it himself, displayed the metaphysical element of such a construction. It will not be without interest to examine this construction more closely. This metaphysical exposition of a subject matter which not only itself, but in its determinations, seemed to belong to experience, is remarkable in part because, as a conceptual experiment, it gave at least the impetus for the modern philosophy of nature, a philosophy which does not make nature the foundation of science as something given to perception through the senses, but discerns its determinations in the absolute concept. In part also because that Kantian construction is still deeply entrenched and held as a philosophical beginning and the foundation of physics. Now it is true that, as it exists for the senses, matter is not a subject of logic, no more than space and spatial determinations are. Nevertheless, the forces of attraction and repulsion, when regarded as forces of sensuous matter, also have for a foundation of pure determinations of the one and the many here considered, and their reciprocal connections, to which I have given the names of repulsion and attraction, because these were the most readily available. On closer inspection, Kant's procedure in the deduction of matter from these forces, which he calls a construction, does not deserve this name, unless any kind of reflection, even analytical reflection, be called a construction. And to be sure, subsequent philosophers of nature have employed the name constructing for even the shallowest ratiocination and the most baseless concoction of an unbridled imagination and thoughtless reflection. And the so-called factors of attraction and repulsion have especially been used as favorites everywhere. For Kant's procedure is at bottom analytical, not constructive. It presupposes the representation of matter and then asks which forces belong to it in order to obtain its presupposed determinations. Thus, on the one hand, he demands the force of attraction because through repulsion alone, without attraction, no matter could exist, in fact, from his metaphysical foundations of natural science. On the other hand, he equally derives repulsion from matter, and gives as the reason for it that we represent matter as impenetrable, since it is in this determination that matter presents itself to the sense of touch, through which it reveals itself to us. Consequently, he proceeds, repulsion is directly thought in the concept of matter, for it is immediately given together with it. Attraction, by contrast, is added to it by way of inferences. These inferences, however, also rest on what has just been said, namely, that a matter that had merely repulsive forces would not exhaust what we mean by matter. This is, as is lucidly clear, the procedure of a cognition that reflects upon experience, begins by perceiving determinations in appearance, then lays them down as a foundation, and, for a so-called explanation of them, assumes corresponding basic elements or forces that supposedly produce those determinations of appearance. As regards this distinction, just mentioned in the way cognition finds repulsion and attraction in matter, Kant further observes that the force of attraction does not any the less belong to the concept of matter, although it is not contained in it, end quote. Kant stresses these last words, but it is not difficult to see just where the distinction would lie, for a determination that belongs to the concept of a fact must, in truth, be contained in it.
Yeah, but it is difficult.
Where?
You said, but it is not.
Yeah, but it is. Yeah, sorry. But it is difficult to see just where the distinction would lie, for a determination that belongs to the concept of a fact must, in truth, be contained in it. What causes the difficulty and gives rise to this hollow subterfuge is that, from the start, Kant one-sidedly attributes to the concept of matter only the determination of impenetrability, which we are supposed to perceive by touch, for which reason the force of repulsion as the holding off of an other from oneself is said to be given immediately. But then, if it is further said that matter cannot be there without the force of attraction, this claim is based on a representation of matter drawn from perception. The determination of attraction must, therefore, also be met within perception. And one can well perceive that besides its being for itself, which sublates the being for other, yields resistance, matter also possesses the existence connection with itself. It possesses spatial extension and cohesion, and a very stable cohesion indeed in rigidity and solidity. Physics explains that for the tearing apart, etc., of a body, there is required a force which is stronger than the reciprocal attraction of the body's parts. From this observation, it is possible for a reflection to infer attraction, or to assume it as given just as immediately as it did for repulsion. In fact, if we examine Kant's inferences on the basis of which the force of attraction is to be derived, the demonstration of the proposition that the possibility of matter requires a force of attraction as the second fundamental force, we find that they contain nothing except that through mere repulsion, matter would not be spatial. In presupposing that matter fills space, one attributes to it the continuity for which the force of attraction is assumed to be the base. Now, even if such a so-called construction of matter had, at most, analytical merit, however diminished because of a flawed exposition, the thought on which it is based, namely that matter must be made out to be from these two opposing determinations as its fundamental forces, must always be highly esteemed.
Let me just
Kant is
say
primarily
something
concerned.
here.
All right, go ahead. Yeah.
Hegel was really triggered because he didn't have to make this remark at all because this is philosophy of nature stuff. But he took 7 pages just shit on Kant's philosophy of nature.
Yeah. Kant is primarily concerned to banish the ordinary mechanistic ways of representation that stop at the one determination of impenetrability, of existence that subsist, point-like for themselves, and reduce to something external the opposite determination, the internal connection of matter, or of a plurality of matters that are in turn regarded as particular ones. These are ways of representation, as Kant says, that would not make room for any other motive force except pressure and thrust, that is, except through influence from outside. This externality of cognition presupposes motion as always already externally present in matter. It does not occur to thought to grasp it as something internal, to conceive it as itself in matter, which, for precisely that reason, is assumed to be motionless and inert. This standpoint has in view only ordinary mechanics, not immanent in free motion. While it is true that Kant sublates that externality by making attraction a force of matter itself, the attraction which is the reciprocal connections of matter inasmuch as they are assumed to be external to each other, or the connection of matter in general in its self-external being, still within matter his two fundamental forces remain external, independent of each other. As null as is the independence attributed to these two forces, from the standpoint of the set cognition, just as null must any other would-be fixed distinction made regarding their content show itself to be. For such forces, when seen as they truly are in the way we have just done, are only moments that pass over into each other. I shall now consider these other distinctions as Kant gives them. Thus he defines the force of attraction as a penetrative force, in virtue of which a matter can act on the parts of others even beyond the surface of contact. The force of repulsion, on the contrary, as a surface force by which matters can act on each other only in the shared surface of contact. The reason given for supposing that this latter force is only a surface one is as follows. Quote, "The parts in contact each limits the sphere of action of another, and the force of repulsion cannot move any more distant part except through the mediation of intervening parts. An immediate action of one matter upon another across these intervening parts by forces of expansion, this means here forces of repulsion, is impossible, end quote. Confer explanations and additions. But the immediate comment here is that in assuming nearer or more distant parts of matter, the same distinction arises with respect to attraction, namely, granted that a first atom acts upon a second, this second atom would find itself between that first atom and a more distant third atom, and this third atom would then most directly fall within the sphere of attraction of the second atom, lying closest to it between it and the first. The first atom would not, therefore, exercise an immediate, simple action upon the third. It follows that the action of attraction would be just as mediated as that of repulsion. Further, the true penetration of the force of attraction, would have to consist only in this, that every part of matter is attractive in and for itself, not that a certain number of them behaves passively and only one atom actively. But more to the point, with respect to the force of repulsion itself, it must be observed that in the cited passage, the parts are in contact with each other, presumably in the state of compactness and continuity of a ready matter which would not allow repulsion across itself. However, such a compactness of matter, in which the parts are in contact with each other, no longer separated by the void, already presupposes that the force of repulsion has been sublated. In keeping with the sensuous representation of repulsion dominant here, we have to assume parts which, being in contact with each other, do not repel each other. It therefore follows, quite tautologically, that repulsion cannot have a place where its non-presence is being assumed. But there is nothing to be gained from this for a determination of the force of attraction. However, if we reflect on what transpires, namely that parts in contact with each other touch each other to the extent that they still hold themselves apart, the implication is that the force of repulsion is not just on the surface of matter, but within the sphere that was supposed to be only a sphere of attraction. Kant further assumes that through attraction, matter only occupies a space without filling it, end quote, and, quote, since matter does not fill space through the force of attraction, the latter can act across empty space, for there is no intervening matter to set limits to it, end quote. This distinction is of much the same nature as the one mentioned above, where a determination is supposed to belong to a subject without, however, being contained in it. Here, matter is supposed only to occupy a space, but not fill it. So there we have repulsion, if we stay at its first definition, according to which the ones repel each other, and only negatively, which means here, through empty space, connect with each other. Here we have the force of attraction that instead keeps empty space. It does not fill space by connecting the atoms, that is, it keeps the atoms in reciprocal negative connection. We see that here Kant unconsciously runs into what is implied by the nature of the fact, that he ascribes to the force of attraction precisely what in the first definition he ascribed to the opposite force. While he was busy firming up the distinction between the two forces, what happened is that the one force crossed over into the other. So for Kant, matter is supposed to fill space through repulsion and through its empty space, which allows for attractive force, is consequently supposed to vanish. In fact, in sublating empty space, repulsion sublates the negative connection of the atoms or the ones, that is, their repulsion. That is, repulsion is determined as the opposite of itself. Added to this blurring of distinctions, there is the further confusion that, as we remarked at the beginning, Kant's presentation of the opposing forces is analytical. Matter, which should first be derived from its elements, recurs through the whole exposition already set and constituted. The two forces, surface and penetrative, are assumed by definition to be the motive forces by virtue of which matters can be supposed act in one way or the other. They are conceived here, therefore, not as forces through which matter would come to be in the first place, but as forces through which matter, already in place, would only be moved. But insofar as we are speaking of forces through which different matters act upon one another and are in motion, this is quite another thing than the determination and the connection that such forces should have as moments of matter. When further determined as centripetal and centrifugal, these forces generate the same opposition as they do as attractive and repulsive forces. They seem to harbor an essential distinction, since in their sphere there is a one that stays fixed, a center, and with respect to it, the other ones do not behave as for themselves. The distinction between the two forces can therefore be linked to this presupposed distinction between the single one at the center and the other ones that do not stay fixedly do not stay fixed relatively to it. But now, insofar as such forces are used for explanatory purposes, in which function they are taken, as are also the forces of attraction and repulsion, in inverse quantitative ratio, so that the one increases as the other decreases, one should expect, that the phenomenon of motion, for whose explanation were assumed, and the phenomenon of their inequality be precisely the result of them. But one need only take a look at the account of a phenomenon based on the opposition of these forces. Any will do. For instance, the uneven speed of a planet in its orbit around its central body, to become immediately aware of the confusion that reigns in it, and the impossibility of sorting out the quantity of the two forces, with the result that the one force, which in the explanation is assumed to be decreasing, must always be taken just as well as increasing, and vice versa. This is a point which, to be made obvious, would need a lengthier exposition than can be given here, but the minimum necessary will be addressed later in the connection with the inverse ratio. Okay.
Yeah, for those of you like physics, eat your heart out.
Yeah.
But yeah, there you go. We finished the first section of the entire book.
Yep.
I think it was good. I'm happy we did. We finally did it. But all right, so that is that. For those of you who have listened to this set of readings, hopefully you found it useful. Hopefully the dogs were not too annoying and the TV. But hey, what are you gonna do? So
think of our podcast character.
So yeah, we'll see if we can keep on going as time goes on. But I think like this will definitely take a background seat for a while, because if we keep on reading Hegel, we'll probably shift over the phenomenology for a bit, just to because it's more interesting. I mean, I'm all for math and quantity, but not gonna lie, it's not my forte and it's not my autism. But I'll get there. We'll get there one time. So, all right.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening. See you all whenever it is that we come back. Goodbye.
Goodbye.